Hi, welcome. My name is Cheryl Smith. I'm a genealogy librarian here at the Haggard Library in Plano Public Library. And Trey is helping me today. He's going to be reading the chats and asking me any questions. Say hi.
Hello. Hello.
Welcome, welcome. Let's get started. I do want to warn you.
Hold on, Cheryl. Check and make sure on your screen that you can see it. Somebody said they can only see the splash screen.
Oh, well, I see it on mine.
I see it on mine as well, so I'm not sure.
I'm saying share. Connecting. Do you see connecting with history using primary sources at Genealogy Center?
I see the title slide, and one or two others have said they do as well.
If you're not seeing it, you may need to go out and come back in.
I think we're good.
Okay. Just to give you a heads up, I feel like I know what primary sources are and how to talk to somebody about them, but it is the first time for me to teach this class. So I hope that if you have questions, I can try to answer them, or Trey, and we can try to help you. We're not always talking about primary sources just for genealogy, but any reference and research that you might be doing. So let's start with a poll. Trey, when have you used primary sources? In grade school or high school, in college, for my genealogical research, or I've never used them? So if you want to check on it.
Now that should allow y'all to vote now. Sorry for that.
Yes. It's kind of divided all the way so far.
Okay, a few more seconds for some undecideds to vote.
We're about split on all of this.
All right, here we go.
In polling. So, genealogical research and also college, it says stop share results. Do I click on that? Boy, I always forget what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, I can do that. I was just giving everybody a chance to look at the results.
So we do seem to all know about how to use it for genealogical research, but college is one of those other places where we might have used it. So we're going to go into what is primary sources. What are primary sources? A primary source is a piece of information about a historical event or period in which the creator of the source was an actual participant or a contemporary of a historical moment. Examples of primary sources include documents, artifacts, historic sites, songs, newspaper articles. Now, when we get into newspaper articles, there's primary and then there's secondary. And primary is like this, where the person's talking about the president was killed and governor shot, and it was the day after, in some places the day of the shooting. And either they were witnesses or it was just immediate information. So this is why it can be considered primary. Maps, we can kind of see that. Now, on maps, again, you have to watch to make sure you're looking at an original or a copy of an original, because here in the Genealogy Center, we have maps, but they're copies of the original because the original is very delicate, and so we can only have copies of the original. But if somebody's drawn one, or maybe adapted it to their own, then it may not really be considered primary. Diaries and letters, of course, those are our favorite for primary sources because they're telling what happened to them. And hopefully in the letters, it's what happened to them, what they saw. Photographs and films can be primary. Other written and tangible items, and we're going to talk some more about some of those. There's just certain things that we find that were written by a person or designed by that person, or they tell about that historical moment, and it's by the person that it happened to or the person who witnessed it. The documents are the same thing. I skipped over them, but I forgot to tell you that there are the original documents, certificates that we see, the census. There are some things in there that are considered primary, and artifacts. When we get our hands on the originals of certain things, they're considered primary. The purpose of a primary source is to capture the words and thoughts and intentions of the past. Primary sources help you to interpret what happened and why it happened. So let's go see, what does secondary sources mean? This is documents or recordings that relate or discuss information originally presented elsewhere. It is information reported by someone else secondhand. Sometimes those stories that you get from your family that are passed down, they can become secondary hearsay because we've played the game of gossip before, where you start off with a true sentence, and by the time it's passed through 3 or 4 different people, the story has changed. Well, that's why some documents are considered secondary, because they're just that they heard it secondhand. There's question about the Muncie massacre here in Plano as to the true facts, because we don't have the true facts from the people that it happened to or anybody that was involved. We have stories that were passed down. And so it becomes a lot more secondary on that information. That's why when we look at journals, articles, they're usually using primary sources that have been analyzed and rewritten to support their article. And the same with textbooks, dictionaries, books. Biographies are secondary because maybe somebody has told somebody else the story and it is secondary. Now, a memoir or an autobiography is usually written by the person that the book is about, or it's written by them with the help of somebody else as the author. Dissertations also are secondary, but they've used primary sources to help write their secondary, their story or dissertation, I'm sorry. This newspaper article is a suggestion of how this is secondary because this is 57 years later after the assassination. So the stories of what everybody remembers are edited and analyzed and rewritten, and maybe they don't remember all the story, but it's been things that have been passed down. Does everybody get an idea of what primary and secondary is? Excuse me. Because we're going to go into this a little further, but I just wanted to try to give you an overall view. Why we use primary sources? It's to look at our original story or our original information and see if what we have is true by finding the primary sources. And it helps us evaluate the sources, look at them. We can, conduct our research based on that project or that question. But when we look at that primary source, it helps us to support everything else that we're looking at. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. And we can look at how ideas have evolved over time from our primary sources. Now, this is an idea of looking at the comparison of primary sources, secondary, and tertiary. I never think about tertiary. I kind of tied into secondary, but this was a piece that we found at the Library of Congress, and their training on primary and secondary sources. Primary, the best idea is it's the raw data. You're going to find handwritten papers. If it's not handwritten, it's been transcribed, and you can, but it's supposedly transcribed word by word. So that would be your original primary source. And so that's the first hand observations, those interviews, the speeches, those things like that. Secondary comes into articles. I think of indexes and abstracts, where they've looked at the original and then made an index to it for what they see on that page and interpret. The same with abstracts. Whenever you look at a deed or a will or probate, what happens is that's your original. If you can see the original deed either on microfilm or in a book, or a probate or a will, if you see the original, that's your primary. Secondary is the abstract or the index, where somebody's read that and then shortened it to a short blurb, and maybe they interpret it one way, but if you read it, you might interpret it a different way. Especially if you know the people in that probate or will, or you know that story and they don't, so they may miss something that's important to you because they didn't think it was important. So this is just an idea of how to compare them. Another idea, whenever I think of genealogy, is looking at a death certificate or a birth certificate. But a death certificate is a mix of primary and secondary. Primary is the person who died, when they died, the place that they died, and the doctor who signs off on announcing that they're dead and that they worked with them for 3 days or they died immediately, but the doctor who signs off on the death certificate, that is all considered primary. Then the other information on that death certificate about their parents, about their birth date, where their parents lived, what their job was, that can all be secondary, because the informant is the one who gives that information. And sometimes that informant is the sister who didn't live there, and she's assuming she knows everything about the person that she's writing the death certificate about, but might be wrong. My grandfather, when he wrote the death gave the information about his father, he got some information wrong. My a cousin that lived with his grandmother didn't know her maiden name. Why? Who knows? But that's why it becomes secondary information. They're not always correct in their information. Now, I did find one death certificate one time where I considered the whole thing primary, because as the informant, it said the hospital got the information from the person before they died. And I was like, well, then that should mean that all of this is pretty much true. because he gave the information to the hospital before he died. I like that. Don't know for sure, but that's another way to look at primary versus secondary information. Census are another problem where it's kind of primary, but a lot of it could be secondary because it depends on who gave the information that day. Hopefully the head of the household, the husband or the wife, gave the information and knew everything, but there are times when even they don't give all the right information. And we look at that as being secondary in some places. All right. Now we're going to talk about how to use some of the primary sources and how they've been used. There are school projects and reports, service projects. We're going to talk some more about some of these here in just a minute. There's historical fiction, a lot of fiction we've read, and we think, oh, this sounds pretty correct in the story, but it's ad-libbed a little bit. And there's talk in the book where, they're assuming that this is how they would have talked or visited with each other. We even have games, local history. A lot of the books that we find in our collection are based on primary sources. And then we also have family histories. And we're going to look at some of these ideas. The school projects, this was a National History Day contest that many high school, middle school students participate in. I judged one many years ago at a middle school here in Plano, and they did have to use primary sources to create their school project about a person of Plano. This one is a student, a project on, Summer Royal wrote the project, and her short film talks about the very diverging effects that the first female cosmonaut had. Excuse me. So she gathered her information from primary sources to create the project. This is one where I worked with Zara Jones, and she was is a Plano resident, a Girl Scout, and a Plano West High School senior. And she has created the Plano African American Museum online. And she's put this together with all of the primary sources that she's gathered from stories from people. I know that I said that that's kind of secondary, so hopefully she checked on some of the information there. She used some of our books and some of our photographs to create this service project. It can be found if you Google Plano African American Museum, or you could go to planoblackhistory.org to see her website. She's done a very good job, and I'm really excited because the museum has been around for a while, or the thoughts to have a museum. And since we couldn't open some of our museums and places around, she put it online. Sooner or later, the museum itself will be open, and this will continue to be available at that time. Historical projects or historical fiction. This is a children's book, Hunter's New Adventure. It was written about Hunter Farrell and the Heritage Farmstead Museum. And so it's about life back in his early years in the 90s or so, as you can tell by the picture. And if you've driven down past it on 15th Street, and this is just a fictionalized story about his adventures as a young boy. Some of it is based on fact, and some of it's just based on what we assume might have happened. There are games out there. This one is the Walden game. It's based on Henry David Thoreau's years at Walden Pond. There's also a game we have in our archives called, I forgot to look it up. It's a kind of like a Monopoly game, but it was created back in 1970s. And the primary sources were of the stores and what they sold and the information they gathered for that. And this is the same for this Walden game. They gathered information to create a game. Local histories. I just had to kind of advertise this book. We the Plano Conservancy and the Interurban Railroad and myself, we helped write this book last year. And it came out the week before everything closed down due to COVID. So we didn't get to advertise it very much or just tell people about it. Well, I mean, that's what I'm doing, but to autograph and do anything special for it. We did gather stories and primary sources to create the stories. We wrote about World War II, about the Collin Creek Mall. There's tunnels that were under the Collin Creek Mall. Of course, Collin Creek Mall now is gone. But we wrote a lot of things, of short stories of things that were hidden in history that we've forgotten about. They were hiding in journals or in scrapbooks and pictures that somebody found. And then we found out the story and we tried to tell it in this book. And it's all based on the primary sources and the photographs and the documents that we could find to prove these stories. There's also the Collin County Pioneering in North Texas that is written by Captain Hall and Helen, his wife. They would gather information that were true facts, primary sources to write this book. Some of the stories are true and all the way through, but some of the stories, they had to analyze what they found as the primary sources to try to write the story. So there's a few things in there that could be assumptions as to what happened, but it's still very much based on primary sources. The last one that we want to talk about is From Cotton Stockings to Cowboy Boots, the Amy Wilson narrative. This is about Amy Wilson. What the author did was compile information from probate, from court records, from wills, from census, from stories, and all the facts that she could gather, and created a timeline pretty much that's in her book. It starts in the early days when her mother was first married to somebody different than Hunter Farrell, which we all thought Hunter Farrell was Amy's mother's, and I forgot what Amy's mother's name was. But anyway, we all assumed it all started with Hunter Farrell and Amy's mother, but actually it started with Amy's father, whose name was Steve but I can't remember his last name. And so it goes back that far and moves forward with court records, census, and probate wills and everything else up to the end of Amy's life. And it also documents her winnings at the stock shows for her sheep. And it documents that she used to play cards with the boys that ran the ranches around her. And because she was part of what made her famous is that she was probably one of the few women that was a ranch hand, raised sheep and went on to be a show woman. So, excuse me, that's how that family history is considered to be a primary source. Any questions about any examples of primary sources?
No questions so far.
All right. One of the places that you can learn more about primary sources, we have 3 different databases that we subscribe to that you could use by going to Research and Learn at the planolibrary.org. And when you get to Research and Learn, there's lynda.com, and they have a tutorial on primary versus secondary sources. And so it would be a really helpful, and it's part of an information literacy video. So this would be a way to learn how to write and understand what primary versus secondary sources are by using lynda.com. Another database that we have is Learning Express Library. And they have a course on Write Like a Scholar. And you would get the skills you need to write like a scholar. So if you're writing that paper in high school or college, or even if you want to write your family history, this is a good place to go to take some lessons on how to write, how to use your primary sources, how to cite them, so you can show that the book that or the story that you're writing is true based on the primary sources that you have. Of course, Learning Express has a lot of other classes, and so does lynda.com. Then there's Explora. Explora is a place to find primary sources. And you can also find magazines and books and journals and newspapers and other things. But if you want primary sources for a subject you're working on, when you go to Explora through EBSCO, you use their advanced search function to search specifically for primary source documents. So when you put your topic in, towards the left side, there's going to be a place where you can check it for primary source documents under the publication type. And this is really helpful whenever you're doing research. If you don't, you'll get primary sources plus all of the secondary sources and all kinds of other information that are helpful. But if you're writing a paper where they're saying, please use as many primary sources. I know that we've had patrons come in going, I have to have 5 primary sources. Well, Explora is a good place to go because you can limit it to primary sources. What we're going to do now is talk about our primary sources in our collection. These are just for Collin County, yes, but the one thing to remember is we're giving you examples of what's here, but also note that if you're researching anything in another county or another state to try looking at their digital collection, or maybe even just their manuscripts. Excuse me. But our Collin County images, it's available online. It's digitized. Today I can't seem to say digitized, right? The photographs, documents, yearbooks, and other archival materials. We house these in the archive closet in the back of the Genealogy Center. It's considered our hidden story, our hidden archives. We have lots of great things. Some things we cannot put online because of copyright. So sometimes if you're researching something in Collin County, you may want to stop at the desk in the Genealogy Center to ask if we have something that's not been cataloged or it's not been put online because it's just hiding in the back. And the main reason it's hiding right now is we haven't gotten to it and to catalog it, to put it online, to make it available. But we do have quite a few things back here. This is a diary of Elizabeth Smoot, or she was called Lizzie. We also have another diary set besides this one that is from Lizzie Carpenter. So Lizzie seemed to be a very popular name back then, but Lizzie Smoot's diary, the one that we have here, covers early years up to about 1899 to actually from 1904 up to 1914 when she died. And she lived in downtown Plano over in the Haggard residential area. And she would talk about life there. And some days it was just that it rained and it was muddy and we couldn't walk to church. And she just went around the block to First Christian Church, but she couldn't walk there because it was too muddy. Those are sometimes what she would talk, but she would also give us stories about what was going on in downtown Plano and who died and what went on. So those were some of the fun things about the diary. And we have several different diaries and sets that you can see online. Oops. Another thing that we have are letters. We have quite a few different original letters. They're scanned and put online. This is about Camp Grace in Texas, I think it was, and during the Civil War. What is fun is that they are complaining about probably the water that they drank or something that they ate made a lot of them sick. And so they knew that they were going to have to move or clean up the system a little bit. It was kind of a fun letter to read through, but it gave us an idea, firsthand account from 1865 during the Civil War. We have newspaper articles. A lot of them are on microfilm, but we also have newspaper articles or the brochures that were created for the balloon festivals from the 1982 to date. We have quite a few of those, the guides to the balloons and information. So that's usually lots of fun too, because it does give us an idea, firsthand account of what happens with the balloons or with whatever else is going on. We have photographs. I don't know how many photographs we have, a couple of thousand, maybe more. And not all of them are online. we can, by copyright rules, anything with somebody after 1923, we can't put online unless we get permission from them, the pictures. And so these are older pictures, which is really still my favorite ones. This is the Harrington family, Fred, Margaret, and Silas Harrington. And Fred goes on to marry Gladys Bishop, who then becomes Gladys Harrington. And Gladys Harrington is who one of the libraries is named after. And she gave us a lot of her family photos. Actually, her family gave us the photos. And we can post those online because they gave us permission. And on the back of the photo is the information that helped us know who these people are. Sometimes that can be secondary information, but because it's, sometimes there's a handwriting where you can just tell it's like current people that are wrote on the back of the photos rather than the parents at the time writing on the back of the photos. But they do give us an idea of people from the early days of life. This is one of my most favorite documents in the world. This is Miss Gladys Harrington here in her wedding dress. Her dress cost $76.50, and it was in 1922 or 23 that this dress was made. And I just love that the wedding dress itself was $25, and then there's lace, and it was $14. And it goes on and it talks about the flowers on another page and the petticoats and all the information about making the dress. And this is hers, and it only cost $76. That's still just one of my favorite things to note. And I love that this gives us an idea of what, actually, I said 22, it was 1919. I apologize. I read my notes wrong, but it's just a great idea of what things cost back then to give us an idea and compared to today. We're going to go on to talk about some databases. Does anybody have any questions before I move on?
So far, none.
All right. The online, oh, I know what I forgot to add to this page. So online databases, the genealogy ones, these have primary sources and secondary. I will say that Ancestry and Heritage Quest, both of them have a lot more secondary because there's a lot of indexes and abstracts, but they do have some original documents that they are gathering more and more. But most of the time, what they have are just the indexes and abstracts. And they'll tell you where to go to find the original document if you want to. The Dallas Morning News, that's what the Dallas Metro News collection is. Of course, that can have primary and secondary information because the newspaper, depending on what you're looking at and reading through. Fold 3 is military records, and there is an index, but it usually leads you to the original military record or photo or documents. And so those are going to be your primary sources. History Geo leads you to original landowners, and they have a map, and it's shows who owns this certain area of land. when you click on it and look at the information about when this document and who owned it, when this land was purchased, who owned it, it usually leads you to the original deed or survey or information. So that is your primary source for finding the original owners or surveyors of an area. It's kind of fun when you go to look at early Plano and who owned the land first in downtown Plano, because later, if you look at your deed, you may be able to find that the survey was done by Klepper or Brown. There are some other last names that might stand out to some of us that we know that they're original. They're the first people of Plano or Collin County in this area. ProQuest, we have the digital Sanborn maps. This is really also a fun area, and it shows you how the buildings looked in downtown Plano or any of the downtown areas throughout Texas. And you can look at them from different time periods. Texas or Plano goes back to the 1880s or so, up to 1940s. And you can find some of the same buildings and see their shape change. There's notations as to whether it was a wood sidewalk or brick sidewalk, or if they had, how their roof line was. Those are the things that happen in the digital Sanborn maps. This was so that when a building burned down, we could also know what was there at one time before it burned down. Those are some of the things that they used. I left off because I forgot to come back and add it here, is familysearch.org. These databases we subscribe to. Familysearch.org is free, but it is also a very good genealogy database where you will find a lot more primary sources, because they've gone through and microfilmed all kinds of original sources and then have made them available online. This is where you'll also in Family Search find deeds and probate and wills that for the originals, and you can look at them there. You'll see birth records and death records and church records. You can see them for many of the different countries, which means that a lot of the records that are original there are also in other languages. But these would be some of your top genealogy databases to find primary sources for genealogy. Any questions? All right, let's look.
None so far.
This is just the tip of the online resources for finding primary sources. And now these are more for history and archives information. There could be like Explora or some of our other databases that we have through EBSCO, magazine articles that can be considered primary, or there's other documents out there. If you're trying to write a paper on a current topic, there are places to find primary sources. This is more like for history or archives. The Library of Congress has a lot of guides to help you find sources. And you can just even go into the Library of Congress webpage and start clicking on their digital resources and explore the whole page and the website to go to so many different places. And they do have historical, but they also have current primary sources. National Archives, a lot of what's there is the military information or what the National Archives or the government might collect over time. There are places there to learn about primary sources, but also to look at their digital collection and find more information. This is at archives.gov. A lot of these places, if you just Google these names, you can find them. The portal to Texas history is run by the University of North Texas. And they have been collecting from partners all across Texas history of Texas and so many different primary sources. If you're looking for an old small town newspaper, there's a great possibility that the portal will have them. They've worked out partnerships with a lot of different societies across the state to gather those small town newspapers that don't have the money to get them microfilmed, or they don't have a lot of issues, but they needed to preserve them. And so the portal has worked with that society to get them scanned and available online. There's government agencies and many of the colleges across Texas that are also partners. This has been, I don't have a history, but they've been around for many years now, and it's kind of fun to watch that they've grown quite a bit, and they take up a whole floor, actually I think two, at the UNT for the back area where they scan and work on the documents and other offices. It's just amazing what they've done. The Digital Public Library of America. This is a platform where all of us that have digital collections could link here so that if you went to the Digital Public Library and you put in a subject, they may lead you back to one of our collections or to one of the portal's collections or to another state's digital collection. It's a great place to go for topics that you may not even think are available or have anything digitized or any archives about. And I just kind of go in there every once in a while to play with it to see what's new that they've added to their collection, because it's all across America. The portal to Texas is also the same way. There are times when somebody asks me about some Texas document and I can't find it anywhere, but when I go to the portal, it's scanned and it's there. So it's a great place to think about going whenever you're trying to find some stories that or information from Texas. We're just about done. Any questions? It's been a quiet.
I had a question regarding Library of Congress.
Sure.
That was asked about how does one go about getting a book from the Library of Congress?
You usually can't. They won't loan their books. You would have to go there. There are some ways to have them look in a book to make a copy of a page or two through interlibrary loan. But most of their books are in-house use only. We can always try, and we can always through interlibrary loan, or we can look to see if it's available anywhere else hiding somewhere.
And we've got another good question here.
Okay.
It's if we want to create our own primary source about a life event for future generations to read, in other words, like info about the COVID-19 pandemic experience, is it best to handwrite the information these days or is electronic format okay? Electronic format could possibly be edited, so how could editing be best prevented?
Oh, that's a good one. I actually would probably do it both ways. I would write it down and make it electronically available. But as to where, there are, we read about it. Trey, do you remember? Somebody is collecting COVID-19 stories.
Oh yeah, I'm drawing a blank. I don't remember the
It was
exact one.
some university around that was collecting them, but they want your stories. And that may be a better place if you did make it to write it online, is to send it to somebody where it could be permanent, and it wouldn't be, I mean, because if you like gave it to us and we put it online, nobody can change that story but us, and we're not going to change that story. So that you would need to be careful where you put it. I wouldn't, like social media, yes, that could get changed up. But if you gave it to a university or somebody that's gathering stories for this area, that it shouldn't be, changed around. And I'm not sure who I'd have to do some research or Googling to see if I could find out who's doing that.
Yeah, and also I posted a comment that, self-publishing, I mean, feel free if you're more comfortable handwriting something,
Right.
but typing would be, quicker and efficient for you to edit and get your story down correctly. And then you can use any number of self-publishing options that are out there now to do one or a handful of books to share with family and friends. And if you want to go a fuller route to do the book for just an experience, and you could get your own ISBN. There's a lot more options, and I kind of opened up a can of worms with that big Pandora's box, but there are options out there where you could get that documented if you wanted to.
I would not put it on a social media platform. I would try to make it into a book or a booklet, or give it to a group that is collecting stories, that, a society or a university or a public library that has digital collections and things like that. But those are some of the other ideas there. So just to wrap up, a primary source is a piece of information about a historical event in which the creator of the source was an actual participant or a contemporary historical moment. Secondary sources are documents or recordings that relate to the information originally presented somewhere else. So, we know that newspapers can have primary and secondary sources, and you can find those at the Genealogy Center, online or in person, and we can lead you towards that. And they can create so many different things. Primary sources can create presentations and websites and documentaries. We have one last poll.
And I'll launch it in just a sec. We have one more question. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to overlook it. We have a question. Is there a guide on how to use the National Archives Records website?
Oh, if you go to archives.gov, we didn't do an archives.gov site. We did a fold 3, and we've done a class on military research, but archives.gov you can go to their site. And one of the things I really suggest is look at every tab and entry that they have in, they have guides to how to find information at archives.gov, and just searching. That's one of the ways I found out about that tab. I mean, that website in the first place was just played with everything. There is an education area so that people that are teaching classes could use that and help guides there. It's not, we did pull it into our military class a little bit on how to find records on the archives.gov. If you have any further questions once you get into it, you can always ask us at genealogy@plano.gov, or you can even email them with questions. There's a place to ask an archivist on their website, and they can help you with information. I do know that at archives.gov, that if you did send an email to them asking for advice, they want the full information. If you're wanting them to look for something in that they want, birth, death, and marriage and anything else like that, they don't want you to just say, hey, help me find the Smith family. That's not going to work. So they want you to be a little bit more with your information. So, does that help? Or?
Okay, so I got the second poll to launch here.
Okay.
Our poll question number 2 is, what do you plan on using primary sources, and where can you, oh, that's not, that question has changed. Where's the full question? I can't see it.
Okay.
I better launch it so you can see it. My bad. There we go. What do you plan on using primary sources for in the future? Yeah, that's pretty much a weighted answer, isn't it?
Pretty much everybody said genealogical research. Good, good. It's really important. I was trying to be open to anybody that wanted to understand what primary sources were for any projects, but we did pull more into the archives and history, but we just have to understand that primary sources are your best facts to depend on and not the secondary. Secondary leads you to the primary a lot of times. So those are some of the other things to remember. Okay. One last thing is upcoming webinars. These are the ones that are for April. Now, there's an extra one put in here, and it's a Connecting Seniors program, but it's about Plano. We're going to talk about the history of Plano at our Connecting Seniors, and anybody can join in if they want to learn about the history of Plano. And in a couple of weeks, Trey is going to teach you about family search. And then in mid-April, we'll have family stories. And it's quick steps to recording, preserving, and sharing your family's history. Any final questions or anything you want to say? Just a reminder that if you ever need help or have some questions and you can't get into the library at the moment, our email is genealogy@plano.gov. And that should be pretty easy to remember. And if you need some help, just email us And there's 5 or 6 of us that should be able to stop, and one of us will help you at that time.
Yes, we have a question about only the 2020 classes are online. What happened to the 2021 classes?
We are working on that today. They are or should be at our YouTube, or at the city's, excuse me, at the library's YouTube page. They're not all at Genealogy Center's webpage. And we're going to look at that and try to get them over to the, also copied over to the Genealogy Center's webpage. But they should be under YouTube as well as at Genealogy Center. I think we're done. Thank you.